History is told through carefully chosen images, staged portraits, and stories crafted to fit an agenda. But whispers of a hidden truth persist. Uncensored photos, long suppressed, now offer a chillingly honest glimpse of the past. They reveal moments of desperation, unexpected joy, and the harsh realities often left out of the official record. This is the history they didn't want you to see, until now.
We're going to start off the list with this image here. This is not one of those niche taxidermy pieces. This is indeed a living two-headed dog, pieced together by a mad scientist. Vladimir Demikov was a scientist from the Soviet Union who did some really questionable stuff back in the 50s. He came up with this strange idea of attaching the head of one dog onto another, creating a two-headed dog. Now, why? Well, he wanted to figure out more about organ transplants and see how the body would react to these surgeries. From a pure scientific perspective, what he did was kind of a big deal. It was about pushing the limits of what doctors could do back then. But is it incredibly creepy and unethical? Absolutely. This sparked a huge ethical debate. It seemed like some bizarre freak show rather than an ethical scientific pursuit, and people got pretty upset about it. Playing around with life like that, creating these weird creatures just for the sake of curiosity, it didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and unsurprisingly, the dogs didn't live very long after these experiments. So while Demikov's work was kind of groundbreaking, it was also just downright cruel. You know what's downright cruel to us is if you don't subscribe to this channel. I mean, what are you waiting for? It's free. We got awesome videos coming your way on the daily, so don't miss out. Hit that button down below. Next up, we have this image here of Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of explorers after finally reaching the South Pole. It had been a long, grueling, treacherous expedition, and they'd arrived only to find out that a Norwegian team of explorers had beaten them to the punch. Not only were these men now exhausted, starving, and frostbitten, but they wouldn't even be remembered as the team to reach the South Pole first. And now they had to make the long return trip back to base camp. You can see how miserable and distraught they all look here, not to mention very unwell. Definitely frostbitten. Tragically, the team would never make it home alive. The weather was harsh, they were already suffering from exhaustion, and they were running out of supplies. The first member of the team to pass was Edgar Evans, who died on February 17th of 1912. Then Lawrence Oates willingly walked out into a blizzard, ending his own life. Scott, along with Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, and Edgar Evans, kept going, but things got worse. A storm ended up trapping them in their tent for 9 whole days, and they couldn't move. They died in the tent, just 11 miles away from where they could get more supplies. This is a photograph taken in 1986 of what were known as the Chernobyl Liquidators. See those white stripes, the patterns at the bottom of this photo? That was caused by radiation on the film. The Chernobyl Liquidators were a group of people who were called in to clean up the mess after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Their job was to try and make things safer for dealing with the radioactive contamination. These were regular folks, soldiers, firefighters, and other workers who faced really dangerous conditions to help control the aftermath. These workers had to deal with high levels of radiation, and many of them got sick later on due to exposure. They didn't have fancy gear like we might see today. In fact, there wasn't even enough protective equipment for everyone, so some of them had to construct their own out of leather and lead plates. It was an incredibly tough and risky job, and they faced severe health consequences because of it. Some, of course, even died because of the exposure. Alright, this is a pretty famous photograph in the world of paranormal photography, and for good reason. This picture has a pretty chilling tale behind it. It's a very classic kind of ghost story. Back in 1924, during a routine voyage, tragedy struck the SS Watertown when 2 crew members, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, lost their lives and were buried at sea. 2 men had been sent to the ship's interior cofferdam to clean and do repairs, but they were unaware there was poisonous gas leaking into the area they were working in, and they died inhaling the fumes. What followed was this series of events that would go down in maritime history as one of the eeriest tales ever told by seafarers. After the burial, the remaining crew reported an unsettling sight. They claimed to see ghostly faces appearing in the water alongside the ship, and the faces looked just like Courtney and Mihan. One crew member managed to snap the famous photo that is now infamous, seemingly revealing their ghostly faces in the water.
Number 6, nuclear site list. All right, back to the dark stuff. Here on Most Amazing, we love lists, right? I'm not sure if you can tell. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe, yada yada, we love it. But apparently the US government also fancies a list or two. Who thought? Back when Obama was still running the show, a report was delivered to Congress, or rather it was supposed to be. The 266-page report featuring, every nook and cranny about the US nuclear program. It was released publicly on the government printing office's website in draft form. Draft form, couldn't have been easier, just a casual PDF that shows us maps with stockpiled fuel used for nuclear warheads. Awesome, right next to your resume. Imagine that, so convenient. How does this even happen? I thought this type of stuff could never happen, right? Well, MIT professor John M. Deutsch said that these screw-ups do of course happen, and it's normal, and this one here isn't a serious breach. I mean, it certainly sounds serious, but okay. We'll just have to trust the government. Number 5, UFOs in the ocean. This video here was leaked in the last couple of years. You've probably seen it, hopefully not. This would be a great day. The footage itself was recorded in 2019 in San Diego. Now the Pentagon has since of course confirmed its authenticity, and the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon here, is sphere-shaped and it's flying at extremely high speeds. There's no exhaust, no propulsion system whatsoever. It's just a metal ball whipping by San Diego, and now we're questioning our beliefs, so that's fun. The sphere vanished into the water afterwards, into the ocean, and then was never seen ever again. Number 4, radar footage. Now normally when we see leaked footage, be it of UAPs or leaked documents, whatever, it's always the worst quality. Like that one, not the best, right? Not quite 4K. It's hard to believe when military footage is poor quality, right? Like how can we see photos of black holes and not even have a photo of a UAP yet, right? What's going on here? Well, Jeremy Corbell, he's here to help. Jeremy? What if he just walked in? That would be crazy. He's not here, that's insane. Jeremy took to Twitter in May 2021 sharing footage of US Navy ships being swarmed by UFOs. Like more than one. Sorry, UAPs. We're not gonna call them that anymore. Now this time we have radar footage, and that's pretty sweet, that's different. It came from the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Omaha. The 46-second clip was originally recorded July 15th, 2019. You can even hear people in the background reacting to what's happening in real time. You hear panic in their voices. These military personnel, in the background, you can overhear them talking about how fast the objects are moving on the radar. So, seems very believable this time, right? It's not just a grainy footage. It's like a live reaction kind of. And if he's spooked, we're spooked, right? Number 3, Watergate. I have to include Watergate, right? It's one of the biggest scandals in US history. Right in the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were all arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was clear that they intended on bugging the place, right? It was fishy, it was obvious, they looked like spy kids, right? They were up to no good. Now as the year went on, the election came closer and closer, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork comes this anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post that the Watergate bugging incident was a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage kicked off by none other than President Nixon himself. It was kicked off by his re-election and directed by officials of the White House. It was a whole planned thing. Now despite this information leak and it being reported to the news, Nixon was still re-elected. Now these men were clearly linked to a fundraising group for Nixon, but his administration just kept denying any involvement, right? That's the key. Deny, deny, deny. It wasn't until later that year in 1972 when reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they came forward and exposed everything. Now we got the truth. They exposed the administrator's role in the entire scandal, how they had an inside source, an FBI agent named Mark Felt. It was a whole thing. This ultimately led to Nixon resigning in 1974, the first ever president to do so. Yeah, that's how you know you got caught, when you have to resign. Know what I mean? Number 2, shadow brokers. Back in August 2016, a group named the Shadow Brokers were the talk of the town. And with that name, how can you not be, right? The shadow brokers would steal cyber weapons from an NSA hacking unit and then proceed to sell them online to the highest bidder. Now this sounds made up, this sounds like it's from a movie, this is crazy, right? Now these tools in question, these cyber weapons, they've been used by many countries and many not so great sounding schemes. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, you name it, these cyber attacks can happen anywhere, right? The 2019 ransomware cyber attack, that's one example. This incident was connected to the shadow brokers. So whoever this mysterious group is, it still remains a mystery and still sounds made up as shit. It sounds like a DC Comics villain. It's insane. And finally, number 1, motorized roller skates. We'll end on a fun one, cause you know, why not? This last one they've been working on for a very long time and we still can't crack it, right? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen working on this channel, so I gotta end with it. Motorized roller skates, what a nightmare this would be. Imagine if this worked out. Even Elon Musk would see this and be like, no, that's crazy. This photo was taken at the Sunoco station in Hartford, Connecticut. Now context aside, this is an odd one. A guy with a briefcase is filling up at the gas station and he's wearing roller skates. That would look bad today. You would have SWAT teams rolling up if you saw that, right? It's 1956 and that futuristic looking man right there is Mike Dreschler. Now at the time he was working for a Detroit skate company, but he was very close to gas powered skates. They would have cost around $250, which today is around $2,400. And its max speed was 17 miles an hour. Again, imagine that in the closing act of like a Mission Impossible movie. That's crazy. Now obviously the public wasn't supposed to see this. They feared that it would encourage folks to get creative on their own and, you know, launch their way to work. So yeah, don't make rocket skates with gasoline. Thanks.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Mad. This is a photo that was taken of someone known as the Mad. His real name was George Metesky, and he was the man who terrorized New York City for 16 years while he planted explosives in public places like an absolute psychopath. I guess he was apparently angry about a workplace injury he had suffered in the years prior to his terrible crimes, so of course the normal, reasonable jump to make would be not that. While no one should have ever had to suffer because of these crimes, the good news is that while he planted 33 and set off 22 of them, miraculously only 15 people ended up injured in the end. This photo of him behind bars is extremely eerie thanks to his creepy smile and haunting eyes. I might be the only one who feels it, but it just seems like something's off. You know? In our number 9 spot today we have ancient preparations. This is a photo that isn't necessarily very old, but it's of some stuff that has been around for a lot longer than cameras have. These images were taken in the ancient city of Herxheim, which is located in Germany and dates back to about 7,000 years ago. The photo shows some artifacts which at a first glance don't look too dark or creepy or weird, but just wait. Apparently these artifacts and remains show clear signs of flesh stripping. Yeah, okay, wasn't expecting that one. Apparently this was a process that was part of the preparation before consuming human flesh. So yeah, maybe it is a pretty dark photo after all. I'm not exactly sure how all of these things were used or what exactly the process looks like, but I think that maybe that information might just be better left in the past. In our number 8 spot today we have the lone scientist. This is a photo that comes to us from shortly after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Many of us of course already know plenty about it, but if unfamiliar, in April of 1986 there was an explosion and fire from a nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This explosion happened when there was an issue as they were trying to begin an experiment which was set out to actually make the reactor more safe. Unfortunately, the way this reactor was designed placed too much responsibility in the hands of the operator. One thing led to another and it was a huge disaster and went on to become one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The amount of radiation in the air caused alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, which was over 1,000 kilometers away, so it certainly wasn't anything to take lightly. That is exactly why this photo of a lone scientist going down into the dark radioactive filled area near the meltdown is so terrifying to look at. It reminds us of the bravery of those who went to help after the disaster, and it also reminds us just how scary some of the things we have on this planet really are. In our number 7 spot today we have the figures of the fire. This photo is both extremely unsettling and super captivating as it shows a scene after the Great Fire at Madame Tussauds in 1925. Of course, this wax museum is famous famous for the extremely lifelike wax figures that are created and find their home there, so you can only imagine the aftermath of a fire. These lifelike figures, but with missing heads and appendages, burnt skin and hair, and just clothing in disarray. Seeing this photo for the first time without knowing the story about it was definitely a bit of a confusing and terrifying experience. The heads on the ground really freaked me out for a full 5 seconds. As scary as it is, I'm just glad to hear that it's not real and just some creative casualties rather than what this photo appears to be at first.
Alright, want to see part of the underground hideout of a Russian doomsday cult? Well, you're looking at it. This is one of those images you can kind of smell just by looking at. Never a good thing. Pyotr Kuznetsov led a strange group called the True Russian Orthodox Church. And in 2007, he convinced his followers to barricade themselves inside a cave. Kuznetsov wasn't with them because police had him in custody. He claimed to be a prophet, combining Christian teachings with visions of the world ending. So why did they hide in a cave? Well, they genuinely thought the world was about to end, and by shutting themselves away, they believed they could shield themselves from the apocalypse. The police found out where the cave was, but the people inside threatened to harm themselves if the police tried to step in, and after a few months, yes, months, spent in that cave, the Russian security forces finally stepped in. 2 members had actually already died in the cave and were creating dangerous fumes for the folks that were still alive. Awful. Eventually, though, they were hauled out of there. Does this look like a place you'd want to spend the night in? Probably not. It's run down, clearly abandoned. It'd probably be squatters, and there's no furniture. But even worse than all of that, this is said to be one of the most haunted places in Italy. In the quiet village of Cona stands an abandoned house known as Villa Magnoni, left vacant and untouched now for many years. Its windows, aside from one, are completely sealed up. Back in the late 80s, a group of curious young men decided to venture into this abandoned mansion. They actually managed to break in, but once inside, they heard something. It was the distant sound of children singing, at least that's what it sounded like, and it was seemingly coming from the garden. They went outside to investigate, but when they got there, it was completely empty. As they were looking around, an old woman suddenly appeared in the window above them in the house. She scolded and insulted them, demanding they leave the premises immediately. The teenagers did the smart thing and hastily booked it out of there, but just after they'd hopped into their car and began peeling off, they got into an accident. 3 of them ended up losing their lives in the crash, leaving only 1 survivor. In the aftermath, the villagers took the precautions and sealed off all the windows of Villa Magnoni, believing someone or something dark was lingering inside the property. Weeks later, they discovered that the covering on one specific window, the very one where the old woman had appeared to scold and curse the boys, was mysteriously uncovered. This is one of the last photos taken of the Apollo 1 crew on the day a deadly fire erupted during a pre-launch test. All 3 astronauts lost their lives. On January 27th of 1967, during a pre-launch test for the Apollo program, the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, were conducting a test at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft was mounted on its launch vehicle. The purpose of the test was to check the spacecraft's systems and conditions, simulating a launch with external power sources disconnected. During the test, though, the crew encountered an issue. A fire broke out in the pure oxygen environment of the command module's cabin. The fire spread incredibly fast because of the highly flammable materials that were used at the time to construct the spacecraft. This is one of the last known photographs taken of a man named Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who never returned home from an expedition to Dutch New Guinea, now part of Indonesia, in 1961. Michael was on a mission to study the Asmat people, an indigenous tribe known for their unique art and customs, and while on an art collecting expedition along the coast, Michael's boat capsized. He and a fellow explorer, Rene Wassing, tried to swim to the shore, which was about 12 miles away, but Wassing eventually became too exhausted and Michael decided he was going to continue swimming alone, hoping to reach help. But Michael would never be seen again. Now, the famous theory is that the very tribe seen with him in this photograph ate him. Now, although cannibalism was still a bit of a thing in some areas of Asmat at the time, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. It just makes for a sensational kind of story. There's another possibility that he was attacked by sharks or just succumbed to exhaustion. This is a photograph taken inside Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky, a hospital that became famous for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. So yeah, a lot of people died there. It opened in 1910 to treat people with the deadly lung disease. Back then, there wasn't a cure for tuberculosis, so the sanitarium focused on providing fresh air and sunlight, thinking it might help patients get better. As the years went by, better treatments for tuberculosis came along, and the need for places like Waverly Hills decreased. The sanitarium eventually closed in 1961. After that, it went through various uses. It was an old folks' home for a short time. Nothing really stuck though. Now, what makes Waverly Hills famous, or maybe infamous, is its reputation for being very haunted. Over the years, people started to tell stories about strange things happening there. Glowing orbs, the sounds of disembodied coughs, footsteps making their way down the empty halls. One of the most famous stories is about a ghostly figure named Timmy. According to the tale, Timmy was a little boy who stayed at Waverly Hills and died there. People claim to have heard a child's laughter and seen a shadowy figure resembling a young boy. Because of all these stories, Waverly Hills has become pretty popular for ghost hunters. There have even been TV shows and documentaries filmed there. And finally, we have Mayenga Nasaka. Mayenga Nasaka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during a scary time in 1976, the Ebola outbreak. This photo captures one of the last moments of her life. Mayenga got infected with the Ebola virus while she was working at Mambalat Hospital in Kinshasa. She was caring for a nun who'd been brought in from Yambuku Mission Hospital where the outbreak started. The thing is, Mayenga's case became kind of famous because she was one of the first healthcare workers to get sick during the outbreak. In the picture, you can see her standing next to another nurse taking care of a patient, but here's the heartbreaking part. Just a few days after this photo was taken, Mayenga passed away. Hospital staff didn't have the right gear to protect themselves, and there weren't enough precautions to stop them from coming into contact with patients' blood or fluids. This was the very early stages of the outbreak, and people didn't know how dangerous the virus really was at the time.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended up in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 9 spot today, we have the core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold Agnew, and while this looks like a relatively normal, non-threatening photo, what he has in his hand is truly devastating. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man atomic bomb. This means that Harold is holding the nuclear core of the atomic bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast, of course, took many lives, but so did the long-term effects of the bomb, like radiation illnesses and that sort of thing. It's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand. Also, I don't think I could ever hold something like that. Not only would I just not want to, but I don't think I could even get near it for fear of something going wrong. In our number 8 spot today, we have the eruption. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines on June 15th, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additional smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th, the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It is truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. In our number 7 spot today, we have post-war. This is a photo that is said to have been taken in 1946, just after the end of the Second World War. Story goes that the person in this photo is a soldier who had just returned home from war, which would already be difficult and challenging enough, but as he returned home, he came to hear the news that unfortunately, despite his survival, his family had lost their lives during the war. There is no doubt about the impact that either world war had on the world, and how the impact doesn't stop once the war is over. These wars changed the course of history, and they changed people's lives forever. This is definitely a difficult photo to look at, and it's an eerie reminder of those dark times. In our number 6 spot today, we have All Hallows Eve. In this day and age, when Halloween time comes around, we see all types of costumes. We see a few spooky, scary ones, but for the most part we see princesses or fairies or basketball players or some sort of pop culture reference, but back in the day, Halloween was a terrifying time. I'm not saying that because people dressed as all these elaborate scary creatures, I just mean that the absolute scraps people would throw together to make a Halloween mask are truly scarier than any creature I could come up with. This photo just shows a nice little family as they're ready to celebrate the spookiest day of the year, and oh my gosh, it is actually terrifying. Like, I feel like I'm looking at a still from the movie Strangers or something. It looks so terrifying, but it's likely just a completely harmless and innocent celebration. Honestly, while I'm kind of over seeing people show up to Halloween parties as cats, I'll take that over a potato sack any day, apparently. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Experiment. This is a photo that comes from some experiments that were being conducted from the French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne. He was best known for his use of photographs during his experiments, as evidenced by, well, this video. He was also known for his research into the use of electrical stimulation of muscles, and of course these photos really help to capture exactly that. These photos have gone down in history not even necessarily for what they show medically, but just because of how startling they are and the often grotesque facial expressions seen on the patient. The experiment being conducted in this shot was meant to determine how exactly the muscles in the face produce facial expressions, which he believed at the time were directly linked to the soul of a man. Of course, these strange faces the patient is making are due to the electrical stimulation, but the photos from his experiments truly make it look like the patients are going through some kind of torment or torture. As far as I know, the man in this photo was totally fine both before and after the experiment, despite what it may appear as, which is always what we want to hear. In our number 4 spot today, we have The Spectre. This is a photo that was taken in England in 1963, and it became known as the Spectre of the Newby Church. That, of course, is because of the ghostly figure that can be seen in this photo. I'm always a little suspicious of ghost photos. Some are certainly more convincing than others, but Photoshop in 1963 wasn't exactly as accessible and easy as it is now. The photo is said to have been taken by Reverend K.F. Lord inside of the Newby Church, which is located in North Yorkshire, England. Of course, I mean, like many of us are going to do, people were really skeptical of this apparition and just believed that it was a well done case of double exposure, which, to be fair, is entirely possible. The Reverend continued to swear up and down, however, that the photo was not doctored, so at this point there's no proof to prove either side, and it's just a game of he said she said. So what do you guys think? Apparition caught slippin', or is the Reverend making it up? In our number 3 spot today, we have the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Skamania County, Washington. The volcano is best known for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18, 1980. This photograph comes from the photographer Robert Landsberg, who of course was in the area at the time of the eruption. Before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all of the changes that were happening. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it erupted. Since he unfortunately was so close to the explosion, he knew he would be unable to escape this disaster, so instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many pictures as possible. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, but he was also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. He knew he was unlikely to survive, but he wanted to make sure that these photos did. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. His film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. In our number 2 spot today, we have the boneyard. This is a photo that comes from what is called a boneyard. Basically, the photo was taken during a time when it was normal for overcrowded cemeteries to dig up skeletons after 5 years if the family didn't continue to pay for them to stay buried. Yeah, it's not a great rule, but it happened and it's a part of our weird dark history. This particular photo comes from near the Colon Cemetery in Cuba, and it shows what they did with these dug up bones. They put them in this boneyard that eventually grew to be 30 feet deep. That is so creepy. This photo shows how the area became a popular tourist destination, and this photo is said to have been taken after the Spanish-American War, and it shows 2 American soldiers playing with bones. Maybe not the best idea. I mean, a little respect for those who passed might be in order. It definitely is an eerie sight to behold. In our number 1 spot today, we have the crypt. This is a photo that comes to us from the early 1900s, and it shows the area that is beneath the church of Santa Maria della Concezione di Cappuccini, which is located in Rome, Italy. This area is known as the Capuchin Crypt, and it is a little eerie to say the least. That is because the walls are lined with skeletal remains. It is said that on the walls there are the remains of 3,700 bodies believed to be the Catholic friars who were buried by their order. It is definitely terrifying to look at, and it seems a little nightmare-inducing, but the Catholic order insists it isn't meant to be so macabre. They explain that it's actually meant to be a silent reminder of the swift passage of life on Earth and our own mortality. Well, I can say it definitely does that.
Starting off this countdown, we have experimental electrical stimulation. Taken in 1856, this photo shows a man undergoing an experiment with electrical stimulation. And by the looks of it, it was quite painful. So back then, they would use the stimulation for a number of reasons. 1, to manipulate and experiment on one's nervous system, and 2, to treat certain diseases and disorders. Nowadays, this treatment is much safer. They use it to help with injured muscles or manipulate nerves to reduce pain. But back then, they were still trying to get it right. So it makes you wonder how many people underwent these painful experiments, and how many people were accidentally killed before they found the correct voltage to use. In our 9th spot today, we have the lipstick killer. And if you're liking this video so far, then smash that like button because it really helps us out. William George Helens was an American criminal and potential serial killer that confessed to be the lipstick killer. The lipstick killer was someone who took the lives of a number of women and would often leave a creepy message at the scene of the crime in lipstick. That's how he got the name, lipstick killer. The photo I'm about to share with you was a creepy message that he left at the scene of one of his crimes in 1945. He wrote, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Now this message is creepy for a number of reasons. First, you got a man on the loose who can't control his impulses and he just admitted it. And second, look how creepy it just looks with the lipstick smeared everywhere and such. It took the police 6 more months from the time this message was written to finally catch William. This photo is just a scary and dark reminder of the horrors this man committed. Moving on to number 8, we have the poverty. This photo from 1948 shows just how bad poverty was in the 1940s to 50s in America. This is when the poverty rate was at its highest. In this photo, Mr. and Miss Ray Chalifo were facing eviction from their Chicago apartment. They were so desperate for money that they had to sell their kids. Now this photo was a staged photo, but it still shows a heartbroken mother not knowing what else to do. Within 2 years, all 4 kids were sold into different homes. It also sheds the light on how different laws were back then. Nowadays, that is very much illegal to do. Anyways, this is a very heartbreaking photo. Like, I can't imagine what that family went through.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the disguise. Speaking of the Second World War, as it began to come to a close, many of the Germans who were involved in all of the many violations of human rights began to flee or try and hide or disguise themselves for fear of being persecuted. One of those was, of course, the worst of them all, Hitler himself. This photo, or rather series series of photos was created by the US government as an attempt to document the many ways that he could have disguised himself in order to escape being recognized and captured. At the time, the fear of him being able to escape responsibility and go on living his life abroad was very real. I mean, there have been others who actually did manage to do just that, and that is exactly the reason for these photos. There's also something kind of interesting and bizarre about what happens when we take away the features of his that we know him by. In the end, he didn't escape and go on to live abroad, but he did escape being held responsible before the world. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, it's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before the historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. The ship took a couple of stops along the way, one in France, one in Ireland, before setting off for the United States officially, and somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, someone was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed. It's not clear exactly where this photo was taken, but it is thought to be the last photo taken of the ship before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before the terrible day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense, as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person because he was finally caught by the police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more, I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrific backstory. In our number 3 spot today, we have bad politics. This is a photo that shows the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, and you may or may not be wondering who that man next to her is, and to that I say, my friends, that is the horrible, horrible monster that is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. This photo was taken at a Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago in 1978, which is the same year that Gacy was arrested for his crimes, so at the point this photo was taken, he had already taken the lives of at least 20 people. The reason he was there and was able to meet the First Lady is because he was not only the worst of the worst, he also somehow became the Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and he was the marshal of the Polish parade. The picture is even signed, quote, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter." It's terrible. I hate it so much. I feel very bad for anyone who had to meet him. In our number 2 spot today, we have the first day. This is a photo that shows Dorothy Count Scoggins as she joined her new school. What should be a perfectly normal activity was certainly anything but for Dorothy, as she was the first black person to attend Harding High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was previously an all-white school. After the passing of the Purcell Plan in 1956, there were 40 students who applied for transfers, and Dorothy was one of 4 who was accepted. This photo clearly shows that although small steps were being taken within the law to prevent segregation, there were no steps being taken within the students. As Dorothy just tries to get an education, you can see her peers clearly trying to disturb her peace. After 4 days of this kind of treatment, Dorothy's parents ended up withdrawing her from the school over fears for her safety. These images, however, were seen around the world. This photo acts as quite the reminder for where we were really not all that long ago. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken of the clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walked down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo.
Starting us off today, we have the location of the Maid of Harlech, a Lockheed P-38F Lightning long-range fighter jet whose whereabouts is strictly prohibited from being documented publicly, by a photograph or otherwise. The jet, which was operated during the Second World War, was an incredibly effective weapons craft, night fighter, and observational aircraft. The plane eventually ended up somewhere along the 4-mile mile Harlech Beach as a result of none other than human error. You see, the pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert F. Elliott of the US military, had taken off using the aircraft's reserve fuel tanks. Not an uncommon practice, but it seems he had forgotten to switch back to the main reserve as 55 minutes into the flight, the left engine lost power. Thinking there was an issue with the engine, Elliott decided to make his way back to the airfield, but before he could, the right engine died too. Elliott made an emergency landing along the shores of the British beach where, luckily, no one was injured, and the plane was eventually claimed by the sand. It wasn't until 65 years later in 2007 that the craft was discovered by a civilian. While many locals are aware of the plane's exact location, the distribution of such information is prohibited by the UK government due to its protected status, which was awarded in an attempt to preserve the wreck as well as the wreck site. Next up, we have images of Winnie the Pooh, which became censored in 2017 in China. While China does have a rich history of censorship in which the ban of Gmail, Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as Twitter, now X, are included, no one could have predicted the addition of our honey-loving childhood friend to the list. Images of the funny orange bear became censored after a resemblance was noted between the character and the Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping. The government found the comparison to be a disrespectful mockery of their country's leader and consequently ordered all images of Winnie the Pooh to be blocked from all available search engines, limited as they may be. Next up, we have a series of photos taken during the Great Depression that were banned from being publicly released at the time due to the, well, depressing nature of the content. The photographs were taken by Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, and a number of their colleagues in an attempt to showcase resilient faces in contrast to the backgrounds of ruin in the United States during the depths of the Great Depression. When the photos were presented to the Farm Security Administration, they were not only rejected, but in an attempt to keep them from being published, were hole punched generally directly through the focal point of the image in the hopes of making them unprintable. Ironically, all this did was garner the images that much more fame and recognition, as when they were eventually released, they not only stood for the people's resilience against the economic collapse, but also freedom of the press. Next up, we have America's hidden bunker, Mount Pony. The 400-foot-long, 140,000-square-foot bunker made with 1-foot thick steel reinforced concrete was built in 1969 and was a self-sustaining, fully equipped, radiation-hardened facility designed originally as a safe haven to house up to 540 people for up to 30 days in the case of a nuclear attack. However, in 1988, the bunker became much more, as it was used to store several $billion of federal funds that would be used to replenish US currency and restart the economy in an event of a nuclear attack. The money was stored in the bunker for just shy of 10 years until it was relocated in 1997. Understandably, it was incredibly important at the time that any imagery of the bunker's location, layout, and security functions not be released to the public, as it would diminish the secure nature of the underground safe house and holding facility. At our halfway point, we have a series of photographs taken at a United States nuclear power plant depicting the dangerous conditions in which the country stores its nuclear energy, as well as what the plant workers have to endure. A report released by CNN in 2016 showcases the facility in its decrepit state. After the photographs surfaced, nuclear officials used them as an opportunity to request Congress back the administration's push to modernize the facility. Officials also argued that the state of the facility was actually a threat to United States national security goals and said that many critical utility, safety, and support systems had been failing at a dangerous rate, due largely to the fact that the majority of key nuclear facilities in the US were built during World War II with the intention of operating for just 10 to 15 years and have therefore outlived their safe operational lifespan. It seems as though the warnings and pleadings of the nuclear officials have gone unheeded and unheard, as the plants depicted in the photographs appear to have undergone no repairs and presumably just continue to deteriorate. No wonder the government didn't want anyone seeing those photos. It's terrifying, and they're not doing anything about it.
In our sixth spot today, we have the Stanford prison experiment. The Stanford prison experiment set out to explore the psychological effects of imprisonment. It started on August 14th, 1971. A university psychology professor gathered a bunch of student volunteers and divided them into groups. 11 were assigned the role of guards and 10 were assigned the role of prisoners. It's going to be a 2-week experiment where the volunteers would play their part in a make-believe prison. But the experiment had to be ended after only 6 days. The volunteers got way into character Some guards turned sadistic. They really exercised their power over the prisoners, whereas many prisoners became depressed and showed signs of extreme stress. The study and this creepy photo provide a chilling look at what humans are capable of. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Wild Man suit. Not only is this a dark photo from history, but it's also a very mysterious one. This suit that you're seeing is what historians named the Wild Man suit. It consists of a double-layered set of armor covered in 1-inch long iron nails. What was it used for, you may ask? Well, no one knows for sure. One popular theory is that it was used during bear hunting in the 1800s, or it was used in bear baiting. Don't know if that's true, but it looks very uncomfortable to wear. Maybe it was a twisted torture device. The executioner would wear it and then give the prisoner a nice big and tight hug. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but either way it's messed up. In our 4th spot today we have the ruins of Hiroshima. Here is another very scary and sad photo taken after America dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. The bomb had an explosive yield equal to 15,000 tons of TNT. In fact, it destroyed 5 square miles of the city. This photo shows the ruins of the once beautiful city. Buildings and wildlife were completely destroyed by this bomb. In fact, the US remains to be the only country to ever use an atomic bomb in war. It had a huge lasting impact on the city that we should never forget about. In our 3rd spot today we have the Titanic. On April 15th, 1912, the infamous ship the Titanic began to sink. 1,500 passengers sank with the ship after it hit an iceberg during its maiden voyage. The few that did manage to survive fled on lifeboats. This is a picture of the last lifeboat approaching the rescue ship. You can see it was crammed with passengers as all the lifeboats were. This photo serves as a reminder of this great tragedy in history and all the innocent individuals that were impacted by this disaster. In our 2nd spot today we have the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. In 1906, San Francisco was hit with a massive 7.9 magnitude earthquake. It has since garnered the title of the most powerful earthquake in Northern Californian history. This earthquake not only caused homes to come crumbling down, but it also started a number of fires throughout the city. Hundreds of fires started as a result of the broken gas lines. These fires went on for 3 days, engulfing 500 city blocks. More than 3,000 people passed away from the earthquake and fires. 20,000 buildings were destroyed and 200,000 citizens were left homeless. It was very sad and tragic. This is a photo from this devastating time. This was after all the damage was done. People lined the streets and just stared at the destruction that the earthquake caused. And in our number 1 spot today we have the American buffalo. Now this photo is absolutely heartbreaking. This was taken in 1892 Michigan, and that is an actual mountain made up of buffalo skulls. That means thousands of buffaloes were slaughtered. No wonder why the buffalo population is considered near threatened and are at risk for extinction. So these skulls were then ground down to be used in making bone china or refining sugar and producing fertilizer. It's said that around the end of the 18th century there were between 30 to 60 million buffaloes on the continent. When this photo was taken, the population was at only 456. They literally slaughtered millions of buffalo. What makes it worse is that some of the buffalo were killed purposely just so that the indigenous individuals were deprived of them.
Kicking off our list at number 10, the reindeer gift. We'll turn the clocks back to 1941 right off the hop. When the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, it was of course one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and the United States had to send over weapons, supplies, anything really just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. Now they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, that was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats, you know, war stuff. So thankfully the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. As a gift, as a thank you rather, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, they sent him a live reindeer that the British of course had to accept because it was ill-mannered if you don't. So they had to keep a 6-foot tall, real-life living reindeer on a submarine. Must be comfortable, awesome. Imagine the smell. Her name was Pollyanna and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. She was tiny, she's the cutest little thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks, which is honestly hilarious because you know some of those guys got way too attached, you know for sure. She slept better than most, if I'm being honest. She shared her room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I don't know, is it worth it? I've always wanted a baby goat growing up, so this is kind of the closest thing. I'm jealous, I'm weirdly jealous. Number 9, Stalin Photoshop. Deepfakes are getting out of hand. I have no idea what's real or what's fake anymore. To be honest, I'm not even Taylor. I'm actually Olivia doing a list right now, but it's been deepfaked so well that you believe it. Modern technology is really making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, but it goes back. Back in 1939, a photo of Stalin was published, and he he looks normal. He actually looks kind of great. Some would say he looks way too good. You know what I mean? He was touching up photos as far back as 1939, just airbrushing, just digitally removing all those zits and stuff. Like, really? That far back? But even if you got a photo with Stalin, there's a chance that you yourself would be digitally removed. Like Nikolai Yevtsov, for example, the leader of the NKVD. He was in a photo with Stalin, but around 1937, Nikolai was responsible for orders that had over 1 million people arrested, so it wasn't ideal to be in a photo with Nikolai at the time. So he was denounced, imprisoned, and he died in 1940. So Stalin had him digitally erased and replaced in a photo. That's pretty hilarious. I don't know, this man was ahead of his time via Photoshop. How did he do it? How did they do it? No one knows. Number 8, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Nice, I remember this one. I heard about this on LimeWire. That was cool. Heard about that at full volume. This was a huge presidential scandal. Back when you know, didn't happen every other week and stuff, this was a big deal. It was 1998 and Clinton's White House intern Monica Lewinsky was 22 years old at the time. Yeah, young. When you think back to all this old history, you're like, oh, they were this. No, very young, extremely young. They had a from 1995 to 1997, despite what LimeWire told us. Lewinsky said she hooked up with Bill 9 different times at the White House, and apparently, according to her schedule, Hillary Clinton was at the White House for at least 7 of those times. She's like, what's going on in there, huh? Is that my... Who is that? Number 7, adhesive bras. We'll liven this up a little bit with some vintage history it's kind of funny. It's pretty funny. Let's talk about sticky bras, shall we? What a mess this was, oh my. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. This was news, this was like a new technology that was being announced. It was May 16th, 1949, and the article read, for 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form. This year, for the first time in history, drumroll, they will be glued on. What in the world? How? This is witchcraft. How did that happen? Just 1, 2, that's it? That's easy. Inventor Charles Langs changed the game, or he thought he did, in 1949. He made these bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. This, special glue. This special glue. This specific adhesive was promised to leave behind no residue, it was supposed to be painless, yet at the same time, stay glued on even if you were to jump into a pool from a 10-foot diving board. That was the sell. Yeah, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Well, Langs ended up selling the company to Textron later on, and the product ultimately failed.
All right, next up we have a photograph of leaked Mexican asylum plans delivered to us by none other than the former United States President Donald Trump. Amidst negotiations with Mexico, Trump called a conference to reveal that he had a secret deal, that is. In the interview, when asked if Trump had made an agreement with Mexico to become a safe third country for asylum seekers, he refused to comment on his discussions with the Mexican president, but instead pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat's breast pocket and said, "That's the agreement that everybody says I don't have." And if you're like most people, you might have assumed that what Trump presented to the reporters was nothing more than a blank sheet of folded paper. Well, you would have assumed wrong, as not only was Trump holding a legitimate government document, but it was legitimately legible, as the sun hit the back of the agreement, illuminating the words printed on the page, which were swiftly captured in a photograph that was enhanced to reveal, long story short, that Mexico was to be considered a safe third country, meaning asylum applicants would be processed in Mexico instead of the United States, and that in order for this to happen, Mexico would have 45 days to reduce migration to the United States. Next, we have another case of Chinese government censorship, but unfortunately, unlike the last one, which was actually pretty funny, this one really isn't, as it involves the deaths of many Chinese civilians during a student-led protest in 1989. 35 years ago, across China, many civilians joined together to call for a political reform within the Chinese government that would give more freedoms to the citizens of the country, lower inflation, and overall provide a higher quality of life. While the official number is highly debated, it is estimated that several hundred to several thousand people died in the square on June 4th of 1989 when the government flooded the streets with soldiers and tanks in an attempt to silence protesters. During this sad scene, one man really stood out, known only as Tank Man. He stood in front of a line of tanks blocking their way down the Chang'an Avenue in Beijing. The capture of this image later became a symbol of endurance for the Chinese people. Of course, the event was not a proud moment in Chinese history for either the citizens, filled with hope and passion and met with loss and destruction, or the government, who in their vanity ended countless lives and created animosity amongst its people. Every year on the anniversary, the Chinese government does its best to suppress the image in an attempt to keep the Chinese people from reflecting too hard on the dark day in history. Starting off our top 3, we have Putin in drag. That's right, a circulating image of Putin edited to look as though he is wearing drag makeup, as well as any others that might pop up, have been banned by the Russian government. The image that started it all, which really reminds me of like an Andy Warhol pop art kind of thing, was created by an unknown artist in protest after the anti-gay propaganda law was enacted in Russia, which forbid homosexual acts or discussion in any place where children were present. While the image is, of course, easily available to those of you watching this video, it can still be found in Russia as well, just with a little bit of digging. If you are caught with the image, however, you could receive up to 15 days in a Russian prison or a fine of 3,000 rubles, which at the time the law was put into place was equal to around $53 US. Okay, I am thinking this next one trumps the rest. Well, no, actually, I mean Trump should take a rest from spilling government secrets. I don't know why, but this one actually made me laugh because just reading the headline made me feel like I was being punked. Trump tweets sensitive surveillance images of Iran obtained from a spy satellite. What is going on in the House of Commons? I know that's a Canadian thing, but really. So the image Trump tweeted was of the fallout from a failed Iranian missile launch, and it was taken from a secret spy satellite that no one except officials with incredibly high clearance is supposed to even know about. At first, people wondered if the image had been taken by a drone, since it was so incredibly clear with lots of discernible detail, but aerospace experts quickly determined that it was in fact taken by a satellite. Not only that, but based on the image alone, experts were also able to trace exactly which satellite the image came from. I don't know. It's too much for me. Alright, and to finish us off today, we have another good laugh, as the Thai king, whose name I am scared to even attempt to pronounce, but I will place it somewhere here, has banned all unflattering photos of himself. Now you might think that means that if a person were to capture him mid-yawn or sneeze, they would have to delete the image, in which the king looks a little bit silly and perhaps slightly less than regal. Well, you'd be wrong again, my friends, because this king likes to party. Not only that, but he likes to cover himself in temporary tattoos and party all night long, which usually ends up in the disheveled king dressed in nothing but jeans and a very small crop top or sports bra, heading home in his town car the morning after. Now, for the people of Germany, which is where the Thai king spends most of his time, this is not an uncommon thing to see. But for the people of Thailand, any photos of the king's escapades are censored and banned from being shared with any members of the public.
If you thought these were cool photographs from history, then you have to check out this video about actual photos of aliens that were uncensored. Click the video now.